22 studies, nearly 2,000 people. And the most rigorous type of medical review that exists just looked at all of it and said, yeah, intermittent fasting does not beat just eating less. That review dropped today, published by Cochrane, which, if you're not familiar, is basically the Supreme Court of medical evidence. They don't run their own experiments. They take every properly designed study on a question, apply brutal quality standards, and tell you what the combined evidence actually says. No sponsors, no agenda, just data. And what the data says about intermittent fasting is going to frustrate a lot of people, but probably not for the reason you think. Let me back up for a second because the scale of what we're talking about here is kind of absurd. An estimated 38 million Americans tried intermittent fasting in 2023 alone. It's been the most Googled diet in the world since 2019. The hashtag has over 2 billion views across TikTok and Instagram. There's a billion-dollar app industry built around telling you when to eat and when to stop. Jennifer Aniston does it. Hugh Jackman used it to get jacked for Wolverine. Elon Musk credited it for losing 20-plus pounds. And all of it, has been running on surprisingly thin evidence. So what did Cochrane actually find? The team, led by Luis Garignani out of Buenos Aires and Eva Madrid from the University of Valparaiso in Chile, pulled together 22 randomized controlled trials. That's the gold standard design, where you randomly assign people to either do intermittent fasting or follow some kind of comparison diet, and then you measure what happens. Nearly 2,000 adults, all with a BMI of 25 or higher, so people who were actually trying to lose weight. Studies from North America, Australia, China, Denmark, Germany, Norway, Brazil. They looked at every flavor of intermittent fasting, the 16-8 window, the 5-2 method where you eat normally 5 days and restrict 2, alternate day fasting, modified versions of all of those. And the result when you compare intermittent fasting to regular calorie restriction is a weight loss difference of 0.33% of body weight. That is not a typo. A third of 1%. Not statistically significant, not clinically meaningful, basically nothing. Now hold on. Before you throw your fasting app in the trash, there is a really important distinction buried in these numbers that most people are going to miss. Intermittent fasting was not compared to doing nothing. It was compared to conventional calorie restriction. And that matters enormously because what this review is really saying is not that fasting doesn't work. It's saying fasting doesn't work better than just eating less food every day. Both approaches produce roughly the same weight loss, about 5 to 9% over 6 to 12 months when people actually stick with them. So the question shifts. It's not does fasting work? It's why does everyone think it works better than everything else? And that story starts with a Nobel Prize. In 2016, Yoshinori Osumi won the Nobel Prize in Physiology for discovering the mechanisms of autophagy. That's the process where your cells basically eat their own damaged parts and recycle them. Broken proteins, malfunctioning organelles, cellular junk. Your body cleans house, and fasting triggers this process. That's real biology. That's not disputed. But here is what happened next. The wellness industry took a Nobel Prize in yeast cell biology and turned it into a marketing campaign for skipping breakfast. And the gap between those two things is enormous. The popular claim is that a 16-hour fast activates autophagy, and that's why fasting is superior. But Peter Attia, who used to be one of the most prominent fasting advocates in the world, now says 16 hours without food simply isn't long enough to activate meaningful autophagy. He puts the threshold at around day 3 of a prolonged water fast, not 16 hours, 3 days. That's a very different conversation than closing your eating window at 8 p.m. The same pattern repeats with almost every viral fasting claim. Growth hormone goes up 1,200% during fasting. True, but that data comes from 24 to 40-hour water-only fasts, not the 16-8 method most people actually do. And the spike is a stress response. Your body trying to preserve muscle during what it thinks is starvation. It's not the same thing as building muscle. Fasting extends lifespan, maybe in mice. The National Institute on Aging's official position is that there are no data in humans on the relationship between calorie restriction and longevity. 0. And a big 2024 Nature study of 960 genetically diverse mice found that genetics had a larger influence on lifespan than any dietary intervention. Your DNA matters more than your meal timing. Fasting boosts cognitive function. A 2025 meta-analysis across nearly 3,500 participants found effectively no difference in cognitive performance between fasted and fed people. The effect size was 0.02. That is as close to zero as science gets. So the biology is real, but the translation from cell studies and animal models to actual human outcomes, that gap is where the hype lives. Now, this is where I want to be careful because there's a version of this story that's just as misleading as the hype. The version that says intermittent fasting is useless? It's not. The Cochrane review itself shows that compared to doing nothing, people who fast lose about 3.5% of their body weight. That's meaningful. In the UK, clinical guidelines consider 3% clinically relevant. In the US, the bar is 5%. So depending on where you draw the line, fasting absolutely produces real results. And there are fair criticisms of this review. One of the biggest is that it lumps all forms of intermittent fasting together. Leonie Heilbronn from Adelaide University called this a mistake, and she has a point. A mild 16-8 eating window in aggressive alternate day fasting, where you cut 80 to 100% of calories every other day, are very different interventions. It's a bit like reviewing all exercise and concluding that physical activity doesn't help you run faster because yoga and sprinting got averaged together. Another criticism, every single study in this review assigned fasting to people in a clinical setting. Nobody chose it themselves. And as Paul Garner from Liverpool pointed out, that's a completely different psychological situation than the millions of people who voluntarily pick up fasting because it clicks with how they want to live. If the best diet is the one you can actually stick with, then not measuring whether people like doing it is a pretty big blind spot. And Cochrane explicitly noted that 0 of the 22 studies measured participant satisfaction, not one. There's also the adherence problem. One of the most revealing studies in the broader literature tracked people doing alternate day fasting for a year and documented exactly what happens in the real world. People are supposed to eat almost nothing on fast days. But over time, fast days slowly turn into just eating somewhat less days. And feast days, when they're supposed to eat normally, they eat a bit more than normal. By the end, the weekly calorie deficit looks almost identical to what you get from just moderately cutting back every day. The structure is different, but the math converges, which actually raises a fascinating question. If fasting and calorie restriction produce the same results, maybe that tells us something deeper about weight loss itself. And it does. A 2014 JAMA meta-analysis found that weight loss differences between all named diets, all of them, keto, low-fat, Mediterranean, paleo, were small. The NIH's Pounds Lost trial followed over 800 adults for 2 years and found clinically meaningful weight loss, regardless of which macronutrients they emphasized. The pattern is remarkably consistent. Every approach works at 6 months. Every approach hits a plateau. And only about 5% of people maintain their weight loss beyond 3 years. 5%. Regardless of method, your body fights back. After you lose weight, your satiety hormones drop. Your hunger hormones rise. Your metabolism slows down. Researchers who followed contestants from The Biggest Loser found persistent metabolic slowing 6 years after the show. 6 years later, their bodies were still burning fewer calories than expected, still trying to claw back every pound. This isn't a flaw in fasting. It's a feature of human biology. We evolved during millions of years when the next meal was never guaranteed. Your body is really good at not losing weight. It has been practicing a lot longer than any diet book has existed. And this is the context that makes the Cochrane review matter. Not because it kills intermittent fasting, but because it kills the idea that any eating pattern has a metabolic magic trick that defeats this biology. There are things the review cannot tell us, though, and this is worth sitting with. It didn't measure insulin sensitivity. It didn't measure inflammatory markers. It didn't look at circadian rhythm alignment or long-term metabolic health. Several researchers in the field believe fasting may have benefits completely independent of weight loss, benefits that this review was not designed to capture. Adam Collins from the University of Surrey specifically flagged this. The research on meal timing and metabolic health is still very much alive, And there are newer studies that came out after Cochrane's search cutoff of November 2024 that could shift the picture. A 12-month trial published in the Annals of Internal Medicine tested a 4-3 protocol, 3 non-consecutive fasting days per week, and found it produced modestly more weight loss than daily calorie restriction, about 2.9 kilograms difference. That's not transformative, but it's the kind of result that could nudge the average in a future update. Not because of metabolic magic, but possibly because people found it easier to follow. 3 hard days instead of 7 moderate ones. A 2025 BMJ network meta-analysis of 99 trials also found that alternate day fasting specifically showed a small advantage over continuous restriction, though it disappeared in studies lasting longer than 24 weeks. So even in the more favorable data, the advantage fades with time. Meanwhile, in the background of all of this, GLP-1 receptor agonists like Ozempic and Wegovy are producing weight loss of 15 to 20% in clinical trials. A Stanford clinician named Sun Kim put it pretty directly. In an era of these medications, it's hard to ignore that they will be more effective than any dietary strategy alone. So where does this leave us? A $90 billion weight loss industry, 2 billion social media views, 38 million Americans, a Nobel Prize repurposed as a marketing slogan, and a free practice literally just not eating for a while that spawned a billion-dollar app ecosystem to tell you how to do it. And after all that, the most careful analysis of the evidence says it works about as well as just eating a bit less. There is something almost poetically human about that. We want the secret. We want the hack. We want the thing that makes weight loss a puzzle we can solve with clever timing instead of boring discipline. And when someone hands us a story about metabolic switches and cellular autophagy and growth hormone surges, we want it to be true so badly that 2 billion hashtag views seem like evidence. The Cochrane review doesn't say fasting is bad. It says the secret door that social media promises in the data available right now does not exist. Maybe the real takeaway isn't about fasting at all. It's about how easily we build billion-dollar empires on the gap between what science shows and what we want science to show. Something to think about next time a trend tells you it's figured out the one trick your body has been hiding from you. If you want to keep up with the latest science that actually challenges what we think we know, there's always more where this came from.